Bob, you're on mute.
This is my first Zoom meeting, and it doesn't matter. I just forget to unmute myself.
It's fine. So good evening and welcome. It's 4:30 and I'm going to call this meeting of the District of Tofino Committee of the Whole meeting for July 6th to order, please. I'd like to acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation and that we have a councillor joining us from the Kwikwetlem territory this evening. I'd also like to let everyone know that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. May I ask for a move to adopt the agenda, please? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion passed. Thank you. And may I have a motion to adopt the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held March 16th, 2020?
Move adoption.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Are there any errors or omissions? No. All in favor? Awesome. And I don't see any public comment on agenda items, nor do we have any delegations or correspondence this evening. So that means that we'll move right along into our presentations and reports. And I believe that that would be our Manager of Financial Services. Nyla.
Hi, good morning, Mayor and Council, or good afternoon, good evening, I don't even know, evening? Afternoon.
And good night.
Yeah, I'm just going to take a second here to share my screen because I do have a presentation. Bear with me. Okay, can you see that okay? Okay, so today I will be presenting a financial report up to May 31st. And the information that I will be presenting today, some of the information is new with respect to property tax collection, and I will note those changes because they were not included in the report to Council or Committee of the Whole, and all the other information was included in the report, but I will just take this opportunity to summarize it and present it to Council. So the information that I am presenting is unaudited and it is subject to change. The district's 2020 to 2024 financial plan was adopted on May 12th. And so this is a fairly early report in the year. And typically I do wait until after Q2 to provide a substantial or a substantive report. But given the year that it has been, I felt it was important to get to Council before the August Committee of the Whole to provide an update on the risks that we are seeing this year with respect to finances. So an overview of the report is I'll go through a few items: utilities collection, our own source revenues, operating expenses, property tax collection up to the property tax due date of July 2nd, which is the new information I'll provide this evening, and cash flow. So the Q1 utility bills, I'll just start there, they were billed in April of 2020, and the due date was extended to 90 days from the billing date, which is usually the due date is 30 days. So I just wanted to provide a comparison of what we were seeing in terms of revenue last year versus this year. We saw an 8% increase in revenue and consumption in Q1 of 2020. And so the difference there is quite small with dollar amounts, but that change and increase is mostly related to a large user of the system, not using the system in 2019, but using in 2020. And so we did see a decrease in consumption for the last 2 weeks of March, but it hasn't made that much of an impact here. Outstanding utility receivables as of May 31st of 2020 is 2 times higher than $57,000 higher than in May 31st of 2019. And that's not too surprising to see. And it's actually a collection at a higher rate than we projected. And given that the due date was extended out, it's not surprising to see a higher amount of receivables at the May 31st or at May 31st. The Q1 due date will be July 17th, and the Q2 bills are expected to go out by July 24th. And we're going to set the due date at 30 days for Q2 and that will allow us to have solid cash flows going into Q3 of the year. With our own source revenues, we did project revenues to decrease by about 27% in 2020, and that's a 27% decrease on what we originally projected or budgeted for. So some revenue targets have exceeded as of May 31st, and I'll just provide you with an example, just a brief example today, but we will provide a more comprehensive report for the Q2 financial report in August. Building permit revenue was budgeted at $35,000, and as of May 31st, we exceeded the budgeted revenue at $36,954. So we budgeted quite conservatively with building permit revenue, as we typically do, because of the volatility of the revenue source. At the time of adopting the financial plan, we adopted it with the best revenue estimate and conservative revenue estimate that we could do at that time based on the circumstances. So what this will mean is there's a lower reliance on property taxation than originally budgeted for. And depending on where the actual revenues end up and how the rest of the year goes, we may be contributing to operating surplus in 2020 in this service area. So as I mentioned a moment ago, we will be presenting a more comprehensive report in the Q2 financial report on own source revenues. Operating expenses were reduced by about 6% in the 2020 budget based on what we originally proposed. There is a high contingency amount in the budget, as Council is aware, and that will be to accommodate adjustments to service levels throughout the year. So as of May 31st, we're seeing about $16,000 in operating contingency being allocated. So that's not a high contingency use as of May 31st, and typically it's slower in the early part of the year. We are, though, projecting a higher use of contingency from June to December due to the increased service levels that we've already seen. We'll have a detailed contingency report provided as part of the Q2 financial report. So a higher use of contingency we're seeing in the service areas of public works, parks, recreation, and then the reopening of the Children's Center. The property tax collection and cash flows, this is new information that was not included in the report to Council. So I wanted to provide a comparison on what we saw last year with current taxes receivables after the due date and what we're seeing this year. We did project and expect quite a big difference, and we did put a revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw in place to make up for that difference. And so that's what I wanted to talk about right now is how is that looking at this point in time? Do we expect to use a lot of revenue anticipation now that we've passed the due date for taxes this year? So last year after the due date, current taxes receivable was at just over 500,000. This year after the due date, it's at about 3.4 million. So the difference is $2.8 million, and that's a reduction in cash flows over the previous year. Now that's a lot, it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. However, we do have measures in place to make sure that cash flows can be managed effectively. And so I'll just want to take a moment and go through those. So one of them is our revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw that's in place for $5 million. That difference in cash flow is not $5 million, it's less than that. So that's a positive thing. The Alberni-Kwikwetlem Regional District requisitions will be just over $1 million, and we're required to remit those by August 1st. We don't have an extension on that deadline, and we do feel confident that we will be able to meet those requisitions based on the taxes that we have collected to date. What's really going to help us with respect to cash flows is the school and police tax remittance. They can be deferred until the end of the year. So based on the collection that we saw by the due date, we expect a significant amount of cash flows before the penalty date, which is October 1st. So what we're projecting in our cash flow reports is that we're going to see likely not the same amount of collection and outstanding receivables as we saw on July 1st or July 2nd of 2019, but we're certainly going to see we're aiming for that $1 million mark, and then we'll be able to meet our cash flows and not have to rely too much on revenue anticipation. I can't say for certain that we won't be borrowing from revenue anticipation between now and the due date, or about August and the due date, or the penalty date, sorry, of October 1st. It is more likely than not that we will. However, I can't say for certain that we will. So when we do come back to council as part of the Q2 financial report, I'll have more of an update on where we're sitting with revenue anticipation borrowing. I wanted to provide a brief update on tax deferments. That was one thing that we communicated more on this year than we have in previous years, and we didn't see a large increase in property tax deferment applications. We didn't expect to see them. We usually don't have a lot of applications coming in the year. We're sitting at about 91,000 in revenue or tax dollars that we will get in. They usually come in after the due date, about a week or so after the due date. So we're expecting that cash flow in shortly. Property taxes that were paid through mortgages were received by the due date. And so with respect to revenue anticipation and further tax deferment applications, that's the information we have that's available right now. We do sometimes get deferment applications in after the due date with our penalty date moving out a little bit. We may see some more applications coming in. So as I mentioned, we will be coming back to council on August 17th with a more comprehensive update on the Q2 finances, and that'll include status updates on projects. It'll also include a more detailed review of allocation of contingency, own source revenues, as well as our risk to cash flow review. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Nyla. And I just wanted to correct myself. I realized that you're the Director of Financial Services, not the Manager of Financial Services.
That's okay.
So, thanks. Is there any questions? No. Do I need a motion to move receipt for this? No, we're good. Wonderful. Then I believe, thank you, Nyla. And I think that we can move on to 7.2, single-use item regulation bylaw. And I believe that's an update from corporate services from Elise.
Hi, I'm just going to share my screen. Just a moment. Can everyone see this presentation? Okay. So the two reports that I have to give you tonight, or verbal reports, are just updates on two different projects that have been put on hold somewhat for two different reasons. So I'll start with single-use plastics as we have this presentation in front of you. So this is a bit of what we'll touch on. Just the current bylaw that stands is regulating bags and plastic straws. And then we have the revised bylaw that's been submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategies. A little bit about where we are right now with that ministerial approval and then next steps. So just to remind everyone, this initiative came out of 2 points within Council's strategic plan to advocate for policy and legislative tools that better enable local governments to reduce waste, as well as minimizing solid waste disposal in Tofino in support of the ACRD Solid Waste Management Plan. The current bylaw, this is what is quote unquote on the books right now, is single-use item regulation number 1263/2019, adopted almost exactly 1 year ago now. It would have been June 9th of 2019, World Oceans Day. And just to refresh your memory on that bylaw, it regulates both straws as well as bags, and was the first municipal bylaw to regulate straws in partnership with the District of Tofino. And it prohibits the distribution of plastic drinking straws and plastic bags, including biodegradable and compostable plastic, and imposes a minimum price for paper and reusable bags, and also provides exemptions for each of those restrictions. It was enacted pursuant to the municipal authority to regulate businesses, and it was, like I said, it became effective on June 8th, 2019, World Oceans Day. Soon after that, very shortly after that bylaw was adopted, we learned of the City of Victoria court challenge that had gone to the BC Court of Appeal, and their bylaw was struck as invalid on the grounds that it was an environmental measure rather than a business license regulation. And so even after the court set aside Victoria's bylaw, Tofino's bylaw remains unchallenged and is in force. And the majority of local customers and businesses in Tofino and Ucluelet continue to adopt reusable bag alternatives. However, because of the prospect of a challenge in the future, staff did initiate the process to rewrite the bylaw under a new municipal or a new authority, and that's the authority to regulate the environment. It's a concurrent authority with the province, so we do need to seek approval of the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Solutions. And that revised bylaw included a few changes. So if you'll recall, we also heard back from the ministry that they wanted a bit more assurances about accessibility to the use of straws for people with any kind of medical or accessibility need. And we also had a presentation from Surfrider Pacific Rim asking that we include polystyrene foam as well as cutlery in our single-use item regulations. So the new provisions, the bylaw that's under consideration by the ministry right now is Bylaw 1277, and it, like I said, is enacted under the authority to protect the natural environment, and it exempts the distribution of plastic straws to persons with disabilities. And we did include polystyrene foam in this bylaw, and so that would include plates, cups, bowls, that kind of thing for prepared foods only. And so it does exempt any uncooked meat, poultry, seafood, or trays that would be found in a grocery store, that kind of thing, as well as hospitals and community care facilities. So where we are right now, just to update council, is that our newest bylaw, the revised bylaw, has been submitted to MOECCS in March of 2020, excuse me. And ministry staff have been in touch with us and let us know that they have no concerns about the provisions of the bylaw, and they're just waiting on something else, and that would be the BC Plastics Action Plan. And if you'll recall, BC started its own process to regulate these items and is really looking to have a coordinated approach. However, COVID did get in the way of their own plans, and they are delayed with that action plan. And so they'd like to hang on to all municipal bylaws for a little while longer as they hear from different people about concerns about providing single-use items, and yeah, just different guidance from the public health officer and the BC CDC about reusable items right now is causing a bit of a sticking point in adopting other bylaws right now. So they've given us a fall 2020 timeline. And so I just wanted to share that with council about where we're at and why we haven't received the approval and adoption of that bylaw. Where we are right now is in a pretty good place. So only one business in Tofino and one business in Ucluelet currently use polystyrene foam for prepared takeaway foods. So as I said, we're just awaiting ministerial approval, and then we can move forward with council's adoption. And we did build in a 6-month phase-in for the foam provisions, so there would be some more public engagement to take place at that time. And we can look at future provisions such as cutlery if council wishes. That is something that's still sort of on the radar of the ministry, and they'll be bringing together a working group of municipalities this summer to talk about the challenges and accessibility issues that come with that item in particular. Questions or comments?
Any questions or comments for Elise?
If not, I'll move to the second one here. Just a moment. Okay, so the next project that is somewhat delayed for different reasons, well, similarly COVID-related delay, but more on my part than any ministry or other bureaucracy, is the municipal alcohol policy. So I'll start with a bit of a background and the scope of a MAP, as we call them, just to refresh everyone's memories, and then let you know a little bit about the consultation we've had to date and a revised timeline for this project. So this is also supported in Council's strategic plan to support community members in improving their health and well-being. And you'll recall back in, I think this was actually December, yeah, it's a 2019 resolution. So December of 2019, we are directed to focus the MAP on public health and safety considerations for events on municipal property. Just again, I'm going to go through about 6 slides of a background just so everyone's up to speed on this. We haven't talked about it in a while. So what is a municipal alcohol policy? It provides clarity around the use of alcohol on municipal property and facilities. And the role of a municipality is not to duplicate the provincial liquor licensing process or to prohibit alcohol use in a community, but to provide a set of guidelines about the appropriate use of alcohol on public property. Why have a MAP? So this conversation started maybe a year ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, and the district has since heard from many sectors and members of the community about the importance of creating dialogue around the use of alcohol on the West Coast. So just for a bit of a snapshot, in Tofino and the West Coast region, alcohol use contributes to about 80% of RCMP calls, 50% of ambulance calls, and 20% of presentations to the ER. And in addition, there are a range of broader alcohol-related harms to consider, such as alcohol-related ill health or mortality, impaired driving, and mental health and social harms. However, we do know that not all alcohol use is problematic, and so the district recognizes that alcohol can be used responsibly and enjoyably in casual settings, celebrations, and events. And the goal of Tofino's MAP is two-pronged. So to promote the health, enjoyment, safety, and inclusivity of events on district property, and to be part of a broader dialogue and harm reduction approach to alcohol-related issues in our community. Those are the 2 goals that we're aiming to get at with this policy. And how would we do that, or what would it do? So just to remind you that a municipal alcohol policy only applies to events on district property, and we don't have the ability to regulate events on private property or licensed establishments or home consumption of alcohol. And so the types of provisions that we've been considering and we've brought to different stakeholders are measures that would increase safety at these events, measures that are strategies to introduce harm reduction for alcohol-related concerns, determining whether there are spaces, so these are municipal spaces, where events serving alcohol should not be permitted, and determining whether there are certain types of events where alcohol should not be permitted. These were the 4 sort of categories that we're looking at with the policy provisions. Now this is the timeline that I had presented to you back in January. That's January 14th, feels like a while ago. And you'll see that we should be done by now. That's what I proposed. So this has gone a little bit off of schedule, and I'll present a revised timeline in just a moment. So where we're at is really the first 2 bullets of that timeline, and that is the consultation. And we did undertake a significant amount of consultation in February and March of this year, and even a little bit into April, and then really work just was very much directed towards COVID-19 after that. So to remind you, there are 2 main stakeholder groups that we identified to be most interested in and affected by the policy, and the main stakeholder group would be the public health and enforcement sector, and then event producers who may be impacted by the provisions of the policy. So to date, we've held 2 of our own roundtables, and we've participated in some other community groups. So in February, we held the Public Health and Safety Stakeholder Roundtable and had a really great showing of Island Health, the RCMP, Fire Department, West Coast Community Resource Society, and TGH. And we also participated in the Collaborative Services Committee, Coastal Family Resources Coalition meetings, and then we held a event producer and community representative roundtable and sent emails and a survey to the Wiccan School PAC and the Tofino Recreation Commission. So right now, I'm still trying to get this new webpage off the ground. So probably at the end of March, we created a new web page with a survey for the public. So we hadn't quite gone public yet. That was sort of the step where we had stopped. So I'd like to seek a bit of public input over the next month, and then we'll compile the what we heard document for all of the feedback received and draft a policy based on that feedback and present that to an upcoming committee of the whole meeting for your consideration. This is the revised timeline, and you'll see that just push things out a few months to where we are now, to sort of restart from the compile the what we heard document and draft a policy in July and August, presenting that to you as committee of the whole in August or September at either one of those meetings, and then finalizing the policy as well as all the consequential amendments to other policies and bylaws as required, and still aiming to review in 2021. Comments or questions? I'm happy to answer any of them.
Councillor Steer, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, Elise. I really appreciate the work on this, and recognize the slight delays were not of your making, let us just say. And I did want to point out that even the work that you've done so far has already created some of that community dialogue and starting to build those foundations that we've talked about in that policy. So already the work that's being done is having, in my opinion, a very positive conversation in the community. And I think the intent of this is already being shown that we will be building a foundation to be moving on with. So I thank you for your work already, and hope to see more in the future.
Are there any other comments or questions for Elise? No? Thank you for that, Elise. And I guess that moves us into unfinished business, which it looks like we have none. Question period, which it also looks like we have none. And so I will ask for a motion to move us into a closed session, please.
Motion to move into closed session.
I believe Councillor Law, I might need the recommendation as it is on the agenda.
I have it in front of me.
Thank you.
I'll move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 91A and C of the Community Charter to discuss personal information about identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as officer, employee, or agent of the municipality, and labor relations or other employee relations.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. And I have a second from Councillor McMaster. All in favor? Wonderful.